Hello and welcome to Elections Weekly. I'm your host, Drew Levanti, and this is a show where we prepare for the week ahead with electional astrology, contemplating the astrology of the moment and aligning our agency with the flow of the planets. Welcome back this week to all of the viewers who have been here before, and welcome especially to all of the new viewers who may be joining for the first time. This is a weekly Monday show. I've been off for a couple of weeks preparing some really exciting things for everybody who's into electional astrology, and I'm really excited to share a little bit about that before hopping into the charts for the week. So I have initiated an electional astrology education offering called Initiate. Now, initiate is, of course, what we are doing. Initiate is a verb that we are engaging when we're doing electional astrology. We are initiating things. We're taking action at specific moments in alignment with our desires and the outcomes that we're seeking. Of course, initiate is also a noun. We are initiates. When we initiate, we are also being initiated into the story of the sky. And this double meaning of initiate and initiate is something that we'll be exploring in my course. We're going to be inviting the sky into our lives in ways that you might not have encountered before. The practice of electional astrology is an incredibly spiritual one, and this spiritual perspective on electional astrology is one that I see underrepresented in the way that people talk and think about electional astrology today. So what I'm bringing to this and what I want to offer for you is bringing electional astrology into a spiritual dimension of our lives. Electional astrology is something that can very much be a daily practice. And that's what I've been demonstrating in this show. I've been demonstrating electional astrology as something that we can do every single day. We can search for these charts on a daily basis. It's not always about the big kahuna election that we have to wait a year for. These are things that we can work with on a daily basis in order to enrich our lives, in order to enrich our understanding of the universe and our connection with the planets. Early registration for Initiate is now live and will be live until May 2nd. Scholarship applications are also available, and I will be accepting those until April 26th, and you can find out about that on the Initiate course page. There are some really exciting elections for this week as Venus approaches Jupiter in her exaltation in Pisces, and this coming together of the two benefics is something that many of us have been looking forward to as one of the highlights of the astrological year. Before diving into those sumptuous and divine elections, I want to take a look at an election from earlier this week, actually last week, that saw a lot of success, and I was really excited to see it take off the way it did. This election was the launch election of Pallas at nineofwands.com and their Kickstarter campaign for their book called The IC. Now, this election is my absolute darling for the year. This election was a Virgo Rising with the moon conjunct the ascendant. Mercury rules the chart. It's in Taurus in the 9th house, and it's trine the moon. The moon is moving into this trine with Mercury, where the moon and Mercury are in each other's exaltations, the moon being exalted in the sign where Mercury is placed, and Mercury being exalted in the sign where the moon is placed. So this trine shows shared elevation, and I love how this aligns with Pallas's work, because what Pallas has really done is elevate the stories, elevate the language and the communication and the experiences, the lived lunar experiences of these people, of these case stories that Pallas has so carefully attended to in interviews and in long-term client work with the people in their research. And so basically what the book is not only a theoretical presentation of the IC, but also a very practical presentation of the IC and how it plays out in people's lives. It's a very exciting project, and there's still time to back the project. So check out the Kickstarter link in the video description to support this project even further. It's currently, as I said here, at 500% funded. So this project is moving. This project is going to be funded. However, I think that we can fund it even more, and we can see this work take off in an even bigger way. And you would also really benefit from having this book on your bookshelf if you're an astrology enthusiast or an astrologer looking to bring the IC into a more careful consideration in your practice, because Pallas is a brilliant writer and a brilliant researcher as well. One of the things about this chart that really struck me when working with Pallas on what the election ought to be for the launch is that the moon in this chart is very close to Pallas's sun, which is in Pallas's 10th house. And the Jupiter in this chart is very close to Pallas's own IC. And so this Jupiter-Neptune conjunction bringing all of this abundance and storytelling about the IC. Jupiter has so much to do with the way that we tell our stories, and this has been a huge part of how Pallas has presented the work and the emphasis that Pallas has given to really presenting the stories of other people who they've worked with. So congratulations to Pallas, and let's keep supporting this project. It's super exciting, and I can't wait to get my hands on my own copy of the book. I love this chart so much that it's also the election that I used for the launch of Initiate. The moon in this chart and the ascendant is conjunct my MC, the midheaven in my chart. So I just couldn't pass it up. There are these moments where elections prove to you that they are for you, that it's like it's tailor-made for you. And there's a magnetism where these charts find you. This is one of the things that I'm going to be focusing on in Initiate, is how to decide which charts are really meant for you versus charts that might be for somebody else. We can find all sorts of good elections that fulfill all of the technical rules that we want to follow, but we need to figure out ways to bring these charts into the stories that we want to tell for ourselves, and oftentimes that does bring us back to the natal chart and the things that we're experiencing in a particular time, the transits that we're experiencing at a particular time. So I'm really excited to share my perspectives on this approach in Initiate with all of the initiates. And now it's time to hop into the elections for the week. So our first election is Tuesday, April 19th at 10:12, approximately 10:12 p.m. with 1 degree of Sagittarius rising. In my location, this also puts Venus on the IC. The moon is in Sagittarius in the first house, and it is applying to a square with Venus in my location. Some of you might have the moon applying to a sextile with Saturn instead, which is fine. Either way, this moon has an incredible amount of support because it's in a Jupiter-ruled sign. Jupiter is very strong and angular in the chart, and Venus is there for support as well. This is a chart about learning about our foundations, learning from a place of centeredness and also openness from the center. This is a chart about home. The moon is in the first house, centering this chart on an exploration and a quest for home. And sometimes homes have to be found and sought after. And sometimes it feels like a quest to find home, especially for those of us for whom wandering is also a form of homemaking and placemaking. That making homes for ourselves is something that we do in motion, and that there's never just one home. There's a mutable and adaptable connection to making home. This long moment in history where place is not a priority, where you can move anywhere, and there's a Starbucks on the corner in every city. Carbon copies of each other. And I think this is not the way. And I think this election, this moment, is a way to call in a connection to place, to call in a deep memory of where we have been and where we want to go and where we want to be, longer, and where we want to remember ourselves from the future. Our second chart for the week is Wednesday, April 20th at approximately 10:30 a.m. This is a Cancer rising with the moon in Sagittarius in the 6th house. Jupiter is culminating on the midheaven, and the moon is moving into an aspect with Jupiter. This is a chart about sharing. The moon in generous Sagittarius squaring Jupiter, there may be a sense of a generous teacher, a generous employee, a generous assistant. We give to things because we want them to grow. We serve things that we want to grow. We don't serve things that we want to diminish. Because when we do that, we diminish ourselves. Be in service to something that you want to grow. The moon is sextile Saturn in the 8th house as well. What are the idle times? In what moments are you swirling and not being? Your time and your attention is creative. It generates the next thing. Be careful with your attention because it always matters. Our next chart for the week is Thursday, April 21st at approximately 9:50 a.m. It's a Cancer rising. The moon is in Capricorn on the descendant. Venus is culminating on the midheaven in her hour, and Jupiter is there to receive her on his day. With Venus and Jupiter in the 9th sign of the chart and culminating, what can we learn and what can we teach? Teaching is where our values are put to the test. Sharing information and seeking to expand the perception of others is where our values meet the values of others. And that is where we decide what our values truly are. With the moon on the descendant and Capricorn, relating is how we build ourselves. This is a long-term effort. It requires reflecting on the past, the ideals of relationships, the idealized forms that populate our imagination. At some point, come into contact with the actual face of the other. How are things different in your head than when you say them to somebody? And when their eyes are full of the reception of what you said? And what about when you can't look into their eyes? What about when the distance is too great? What kind of relationship becomes possible then? And what kind of relationship is not possible with that distance? The Friday chart, 10:35 a.m. on April 22nd, approximately 16 degrees of Cancer rising, 26 degrees of Pisces on the midheaven, the hour of Jupiter on Venus's day, with both meeting in Pisces in their dignities. The moon in the 7th in Capricorn once again rules the chart, this time carrying the light of Venus to Mercury and on to Jupiter. The combination of the moon, Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter, all in earth and water signs, connects us to the elements that are down and in. Sometimes we have to connect down and in before we connect up and out. Before we name things, we have to feel things. And when we name things, we do feel things. With Mercury conjunct the North Node, language can be a place of distortion and confusion when we overvalue words, we might lose sight of the feeling, the slippery, vast feeling that these words are trying to describe. We need language for relationship, but sometimes there are other forms of communication that get closer to it, that get closer to the root. Touch, eye contact. With Mercury square Saturn, words might feel blocked. Embrace other forms of communication. The Saturday chart is early in the morning, 4:15 a.m., 16 degrees of Pisces rising, Venus and Jupiter moving to the ascendant, about to be born. The moon is in Aquarius in the 12th, squaring the sun. The sun and moon are giving their light in dark places, shedding light on shadowy things. If the mind races with the moon in the 12th in Aquarius, touching tender places and shadowy forms that we'd rather not sit with, Venus and Jupiter on the ascendant facilitate compassion and calm and a knowing that these things too will wash away, just as everything one day will return to the sea. Our Sunday chart, April 24th, 6:20 p.m., 19 degrees of Libra Rising, Venus exalted in Pisces in the 6th sign, trine the midheaven. The moon is in Aquarius, conjoining Saturn with reception, very close to the cusp of the 5th house and in the 5th whole sign of the chart. With Venus ruling the chart in Pisces in this position in the 6th, it's a chart for helping, assisting, being behind the scenes, healing behind the scenes, doing work that is underappreciated perhaps, but deeply valuable and respected, even if it doesn't get all of the acclaim that it could. With the moon conjoining Saturn, there's a humility and a quiet care. Rules and structures help when there are people that we're responsible for. Without these structures in place, our energy can be drained. With Venus conjoining Jupiter in the 6th, we might not even be reaching the limits of our capacity to help. And yet it is important to have these limits. A chart for adopting a pet, perhaps? The immense responsibility of the care of another with the moon conjoining Saturn at the same time as the joy, the exalted joy of this experience. The Monday chart, 4:25, April 25th at 4:15 p.m., 26 degrees of Virgo Rising, Mercury at 25 degrees of Taurus in the 9th, moving into a sextile with Jupiter, positioned on the ascendant with Venus right behind. The sextile between Mercury and Jupiter connects the ruler of the chart, the individual moving forward, taking action, with this benevolent 7th house party. Meanwhile, the moon conjoins Mars. This chart feels like reaching out in the midst of a crisis, reaching out for help in the midst of a crisis, reaching out to somebody with more resources than you. Jupiter here has a lot of assistance, and Mercury is being squared by Saturn and is conjunct the very chaotic North Node. If you need help, you should ask for it. And And when you ask for it, it's important to soothe Mars as much as possible. The Orphic hymn to Mars is really helpful with this. I actually used the Orphic hymn to Mars several times to avoid compromising situations with martial figures recently. Magnanimous, unconquered, boisterous Mars, in darts rejoicing and in bloody wars, fierce and untamed, whose mighty power can make the strongest walls from their foundations shake. Mortal destroying king, defiled with gore, pleased with war's dreadful and tumultuous roar, thee human blood and swords and spears delight, and the dire ruin of mad savage fight. Stay furious contests and avenging strife, whose works with woe embitter human life. To lovely Venus and to Bacchus yield, to Ceres give the weapons of the field. Encourage peace, to gentle works incline, and give abundance with benignant mind. This prayer is particularly useful during this time as the hour of Jupiter connects to the figure Bacchus in this hymn. To lovely Venus and to Bacchus yield. The crisis of the Moon-Mars conjunction gives way to the Venus-Jupiter conjunction. And this assistance can be offered to this Mercury, who appears quite beleaguered in the chart. That's the last chart for the week. Thank you for joining this week with a little bit of a different vibe. The Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Pisces is in my 5th house, and it has me feeling very creative. And I'm also coming to you on the Mercury-Uranus conjunction. And so I definitely feel my communication opening to different possibilities. And the way that I'm reading these charts is feeling very creative and Piscean, like the ruler of Mercury right now is this Venus in Pisces. And so even though there is that innovation and that ingenuity that's possible with the Mercury-Uranus conjunction, it's being funneled toward Pisces and the energy of Pisces, which is very open-ended. So we'll see where this journey leads. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the links in the video description to learn more about Initiate. Looking forward to seeing you next week, and hopefully in class.